Well, at the table now, a man who should be a fairly familiar face to C-SPAN folks. He is Vaughn Ververs, now of CBSNews.com, senior political editor. And this Monday morning, Mr. Ververs, there's a story by Bob Novak, a piece in the Washington Post op-ed page. Thompson is for real. This is not Tommy Thompson, who announced yesterday, but Fred Thompson, and he's the former Tennessee senator. And the headline says Thompson is for real, and the piece says that in just 3 weeks, he has transformed the contest for the Republican presidential nomination. It is not merely that he has come from nowhere to double digits in the polls. He is the talk of GOP political circles because he is filling the conservative void in the field. Why is there a void there?
Well, I think that he has come from nowhere, as Mr. Novak says, and the reason there's a void is because early on, as Republicans were looking ahead towards this race, I think that they looked at people like Senator George Allen, a former senator from Virginia. They looked at people like then Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist as people who wanted to carry forth the conservative mantle. Of course, George Allen lost his bid for re-election in 2006, which effectively took him out of the running for the White House race this time around. Senator Frist found some problems of his own being a leader in the Senate that hampered his ability to go out there and be an early fundraiser, an early combatant in this race. And so really the Republicans have been left without any real true conservative in the field. And they've looked everywhere from Newt Gingrich. We keep hearing, he's going to make up his mind later in the fall. Now this Fred Thompson boomlet has come up. We'll see where that goes, but it does sort of reflect the void that is out there that at least the Republicans in the ground really feel.
It's quite a buzz that Fred Thompson is creating. What are his pluses in terms of his career? Not just what he believes, but what he's actually done.
Well, he was Howard Baker's chief of staff during the Watergate hearings in the 70s. He's got a great legal background. Of course, he's famous for his roles on TV and in the movies. And in fact, that's one of the things that you consistently hear Republicans talk about. They compare him, Bob Novak this morning does this as well, compares him a lot to Ronald Reagan. And some of that similarity seems to be the fact that he's very comfortable in front of a camera. He's very good at it. And he also has, he's not a knee-jerk type politician. He won't come out and do outrageous things or say outrageous things. He's fairly cautious and very conservative, but has the smiling face of conservatism as well. And I think that's what some Republicans are really looking at right now.
A lot to talk about with the Republicans campaign 2008. Our guest is Vaughn Ververs of CBSNews.com. He is senior political editor. Here are our numbers. Republicans call 202-737-0001. Democrats, if you want to talk about the Republicans, call 202-737-0002. Independents, 202-628-0205. Talking about the Republicans here, but Vaughn Ververs, the lead stories today talk about the Democratic fundraising and that Senator Clinton shattered a record, 36 million total, 26 million raised in the first quarter. When are we going to see GOP numbers?
Well, it's very interesting that we haven't seen GOP numbers yet. Yesterday, the Clinton campaign was first out of the box, obviously trying to sort of set the bar. They knew that they had done a fairly good job, although some people might have expected a little bit more. Still, a total of 26 million raised in 10 weeks is pretty phenomenal when it comes to this sort of thing. Republicans, I think, you're not hearing from them because they're not up there in that range yet. A lot of people expect them to be well under $20 million, most of them. Mitt Romney might get close somewhere. But I think that really it reflects sort of the energy and excitement that the Democrats are having right now within their own party and sort of the lack of excitement that the Republicans are finding out on the campaign trail. Of course, President Bush set every fundraising record there is when he ran for president in 2000, 2004. That excitement doesn't seem to be there quite yet for the Republicans. Of course, a lot of reasons for that.
When GOP numbers do come out, what would you be expecting and what would actually surprise you?
It would surprise me if any of them got close to what we expect. Barack Obama, we haven't heard from him, but over $20 million. That would be a little bit surprising to me. I think that would be very impressive. It would surprise me if Mitt Romney weren't very close to being in first place in that race. John McCain and he have been playing this sort of expectations game. John McCain out publicly saying that he hasn't been able to meet his goals and that he's a little disappointed with his fundraising. A lot of folks speculate that that's sort of a bait and switch technique where he's going to surprise a lot of people. But I think the fact that we haven't heard anything from those two campaigns suggests that maybe they're not that outstanding at the moment. But it would surprise me if Mitt Romney didn't perform very well.
And before we go to calls, let's bring it back to Fred Thompson, the former senator. If he says he wants to get in, if he should announce that he's going to get in, with all those folks looking for money, how does he compete?
Well, you know, there are really there are different campaigns you can run. And a person like Mitt Romney or a Barack Obama in those cases, they're sort of trying to prove that they belong with the big boys, that they can raise enough money to compete with the major candidates like Hillary Clinton, John McCain, people who have been household names for years and years. They're sort of trying to elevate themselves to that status. There are other people such as Tom Tancredo, who's going to announce today in Iowa that he's running for president, who are going to be running more of an insurgent, one-issue campaign that doesn't really take a lot of money. And there are variations in between, but you sort of have to decide what kind of campaign you want. Thompson, I think, would find it very difficult to raise a lot of money quickly, but if he were able to excite the grassroots, he could raise enough to keep sort of almost a shoestring campaign going for a little while till he does catch on.
Congressman Tom Tancredo, as Mr. Verver said, will be announcing on a radio show in Iowa today, where there's lots of action this week. That's an event we're looking to cover. We'll probably try to put it on in prime time for you tonight. Little Compton, Rhode Island. You're on with Vaughn Ververs. Hello.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
I'm glad I'm here, and I have a day off today. The reason why I called is you're talking to right here the base of the Republican Party. I'm one of that base. Now, I want Fred Thompson actually to jump into the race because, you know, he is a true traditional conservative. He's not a neocon. He's a true conservative. Secondly, I'd like to make a point. Like last night on a competitor network, I saw a speech by Ronald Reagan, which he made in 1985. Now, if you take a look at him, if you take a look at the current resident of the White House, you know, you can see why Bush is having a problem. I find President Bush, and I'm the base of the party, to be a complete joke. And I'm going to tell you why. Everything was handed to him on a silver platter, okay? Everything he did in his life, basically, he failed. In the oil industry, he failed. His family bailed him out. You take a look at President Reagan, the greatness of that man, self-made, and the liberals made fun of him. But overall, you look, that guy, everything he did, he succeeded, okay? And he succeeded in ultimate victory for this nation. But this guy here, I look at Reagan's speech last night, I want Thompson in the race. This guy, I can see why his ratings are so low. You look at me, a lot of conservatives have had it with him because he is incapable.
Vaughn Ververs.
Well, the caller points out something that we are increasingly hearing from Republicans at a recent congressional CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference that was held here in Washington last month. You heard an awful lot of talk about Ronald Reagan, but you heard absolutely no talk about this current president. You know, the president is losing a lot of support among his base. He's really losing conservatives like we just heard from because they feel that they were able to elect this president twice. They were called upon to do the job on the ground, and they really haven't been paid back the way they expect to. And of course, the war is not helping it out at all.
Vaughn Ververs is senior political editor for CBSNews.com. He does daily coverage and long-term planning for the website's political coverage. You may remember him as editor of The Hotline from 2002 to 2005. A writer for Talking Heads from 99 to 2005, associate producer at Fox News Sunday, associate producer at CBS News, and deputy press secretary for Pat Buchanan's campaign back in 92. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you are up.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for C-SPAN.
Sure.
I am a Democrat, and I was wondering what is wrong with all the Republican wives? It doesn't. I'm an Edwards backer, and when I look at Elizabeth Edwards compared to the wives of the Republican candidates, I saw a picture of Fred Thompson. Is his wife young enough to be his daughter? What's going on with Republican wives that are running for president?
Mr. Ververs.
Well, I do think that Senator Thompson has not been married that awfully long as some of the candidates. But you touch on point that a lot of people have been talking about when it comes to the spouses of these candidates, especially on the Republican side. Mitt Romney sort of runs around and makes a joke. Being a Mormon, he says that it's strange that he's the only candidate with has only had one wife. And he makes that as a joke, but he also makes it as a way to point out the fact that he does have a long-term marriage. I think he's been married something like 38 years this month. He's got 5 sons. He sort of is the typical stable family that you expect from Republican candidates traditionally. All the other candidates, major candidates anyway, John McCain has been divorced, although he's been married to Cindy McCain for a long time, and she's something of a known quantity. I think she was able to introduce herself on the trail in 2000 when he ran for president. But of course, Judith Nathan Giuliani, Rudy Giuliani's wife, has been in the news a lot lately.
Let me jump in on that point, because the tabloids are all over Judith Nathan today, some in good ways, some maybe not so good ways. Daily News headline has an exclusive with Judith Nathan's first husband speaking out, and he says she'd be great in the White House, a terrific First Lady. There's a picture of this gentleman, Jeffrey Ross, who was Judith Nathan's first husband. They were married for 5 years. Picture of the current Mrs. Giuliani right there. Terrific First Lady, says that headline in the Daily News. And then there's this story in the New York Post, Judy's Dog Days, animals killed in sales demos. What they put on the first page is Rudy Giuliani's wife, Judy, was part of a sales program that included operations on dogs to demonstrate the stapling products of a surgical supply company in the 70s. The dogs either died on the operating table or were killed afterward. Why is this so important for the front page?
Because it's New York. That's why, I think what you're seeing here is a perfect example of something that Rudy Giuliani and his wife are very familiar with, him having been mayor of New York for 2 terms. And that is the constant pressure and the constant tabloidization of the news and being under the spotlight all the time. But people in the rest of the country aren't necessarily used to that. And I think that as they begin to get exposed to some of this over-the-top coverage in some cases it does highlight things that people might be concerned about. But I think that it sort of starts to go into the territory of people really don't want to know that much. And we'll see how that plays out over time. Of course, we just learned not that long ago that Judith Giuliani had been married the first time at all. It was a secret until just recently, although Rudy Giuliani had said that he had known that all along. He also said last week that she would be welcome in to sit on any of his cabinet meetings, and then sort of had to backtrack a little bit from there and say, well, she's not going to be part of my cabinet. She'll be an advisor. But it does highlight the role that I think spouses increasingly play in campaigns as we go along. People breaking out of roles that we're traditionally accustomed to seeing them play in these campaigns. Women and men now coming into the table with careers of their own. Of course, we have a former president as a spouse in this race, something that's totally new to all of us. So you're seeing these spouses come to the table with a lot more for themselves than they ever have before.
Here's the front cover of the Weekly Standard, picture of Mayor Giuliani riding an elephant with, looks like Senator McCain behind him there in caricature. Ahead of the pack for now. Andrew Ferguson writing on Rudy Giuliani in the Weekly Standard. Northport, Florida, you're on with Vaughn Ververs. Thanks for waiting.
Good morning.
Morning.
I would like the media to ask the candidates questions on the foreign policy regarding Israel. I don't see any candidate out there that I'm interested in, and I consider myself the base of the Republican Party. So anybody that's willing to divide Israel into a 2-state, quote, solution like President Bush is, and I support President Bush, and I believe he's a Christian. But I believe he's been blinded, but I still believe he's doing God's will. That's my opinion. And I believe that the candidate that's going to run the office should be able to be wise spiritually. We're in a spiritual war. And the Democrats are unable, in my opinion, to fight this war, to be president. Because, like, for instance, the Mormon that's running, anybody that says they deny Jesus as Christ, like the Islam or Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon, that is considered an antichrist. That's what the good book says, the Bible.
Mr. Ververs.
Well, I won't get into the theology of Mormonism because I don't know that much about it. But going back to your point on foreign policy, I think that it would be very unlikely for any of these candidates to part ways from the current policy when it comes to Israel. They are all strong supporters, at least certainly on the Republican side, have all voiced strong support. We haven't gotten down into details of what their policy would be in that area yet. I'm sure that will be coming. But the bulk of their foreign policy time, just like the bulk of our time focusing on the rest of the world, is sort of consumed by the conflict in Iraq and the situation in Iran. And these candidates really, especially on the Republican side, would just as soon not venture into that territory too often. They're in a very rough position where the bulk of their own party continues to support the war to a great extent, but the public at large does not. They can't go too far, but they can't break from the president yet either, so they'd rather sit around talking about tax policy and some other issues.
Tommy Thompson talked a lot about Iraq yesterday. The former Wisconsin governor says he will fill a void in the 08 race. Here's one of the stories in USA Today. First thing, Vaughn Ververs, he says he is the, quote, reliable conservative in the race. What does he mean by that?
Well, that he was sort of pressed on that yesterday in the interview and sort of backtracked a little bit and said, well, I'm not saying these other guys aren't reliable conservatives. It's basically he's trying to fill the same void that we see people talking about Fred Thompson. They look at Rudy Giuliani, who is opposite of most of the Republican Party on key issues from abortion to gay rights to gun control. He's parted with them in the past, although he now says that he would like to, he wants to appoint constrictionist judges, which is code word for, I'll appoint conservatives. Mitt Romney has switched his position on abortion, has suddenly become a big gun advocate where he was not in the past, and some other issues of that are important to a lot of social conservatives. He's really just completely flipped positions on those. John McCain, while he's very reliably conservative on some of those issues, has infuriated the party on other issues such as voting against President Bush's tax cuts, championing campaign finance reform, which they see as a violation of free speech. So none of these top-tier candidates really speak to the party as we have known it for a long time. And that's what Tommy Thompson is trying to get across there.
Tommy Thompson, if you don't know, is 65 years old. He is a lawyer, Army Reserve, Health and Human Services Secretary, as we know, and prior to joining the administration in 2001, he was the longest-serving governor of Wisconsin. As far as Iraq goes, Vaughn Ververs, Tommy Thompson said he agreed with Bush's planned veto of House and Senate war funding bills that set guidelines. He said the bills amount to telling enemies that we are not there for the long haul. But what's interesting, too, is he was asked how he would differ from Bush on Iraq. He outlined a three-part Iraq plan, according to this piece in USA Today. The first part would be a vote on continued U.S. presence by Iraqi legislatures and withdrawal if they vote against it. Is that a brand new idea?
I don't think, it doesn't sound to me like that's completely new. I mean, that's something the administration has said for years now, that if Iraq wanted them to leave, they would certainly leave. This process itself may be a new wrinkle in that. And I do think it's interesting that Tommy Thompson is going a little bit further towards a withdrawal of the troops. As I said, it's a very difficult issue for Republican candidates to deal with. On the one hand, they want to be supportive of the policy. On the other hand, they realize that there has to be an end game here someplace. They'd like to see that end game come about as part of the administration policy so that they don't have to really talk about it. They deal with the aftermath of it. But that is sort of an interesting point. And the further we go on in this process without any real end game being laid out, whether it's the Congressional Democratic Plan or the administration saying the surge has worked and we're going to get out of there now, the further we go along, I think the more pressure you're going to see on Republican candidates to start to break with the administration on some of these issues.
Back to calls on Republican politics. Vaughn Ververs, our guest, Eureka, Missouri. Thanks for waiting. Hi.
How you doing?
Fine.
I'm not Democrat or Republican, and I don't think it ought to be all about money.
Tell us more.
I think, I listen to C-SPAN and who's going to run and who ain't. And, like I said, I'm not Democrat or Republican, but Ron Paul seems to be the one that has the best idea.
Another vote for Ron Paul. We
Ron-
get a lot of them
I'll
here.
bet you do. Yes, Ron Paul, the congressman from Texas, who's a libertarian sort of in the race right now, speaking to a segment of the Republican Party. I think the caller sort of has highlighted something that we hear a lot of in the media, which is that people are tired of hearing about the campaign already. They're tired of hearing about the money already. They want to. There's a real concern out there that this is going to be overkill, that we're getting started so early with so much attention being paid to it. What is that going to come to in the end? I think the answer to that is that that's a reflection of there is a lot of excitement about this campaign. There are a lot of people who are very interested in this campaign. There's a big void being created by the fact that the president is leaving office. There's nobody who's representing his administration directly trying to seek that office. So you've got a void that all these people are rushing into. You've got an issue that's divided the country for the past 4 years in Iraq that is paramount of importance. And I think it's very natural that you would have the money as a reflection of that, the interest as a reflection of that. I think that the fears out there are a little unfounded that people won't be able to sustain interest in this because I think it is such an important campaign.
Caller now from Fargo, North Dakota. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Ververs, for being here this morning, because I think there's something else that needs to be talked about, and that's name ID. And the name ID issue shows that there's strong support for late candidates in the 2000 race, and that being Fred Thompson, Newt Gingrich, and even the possibility of Secretary of State Condi Rice. And all three of them have been showed in the past 2 years, strong in the polls. And Newt Gingrich with high name ID, as well as Condi Rice with high name ID. In my opinion, that's worth almost $10 million worth of advertising to get to that level where 90% of the nation knows who you are.
We've talked a lot about Newt Gingrich in recent weeks, and he may make some kind of announcement around Labor Day or something other. Speak to Newt Gingrich first.
Well, Newt Gingrich is sort of he's almost the most fascinating name that we've heard thrown out there, because this is somebody who sort of left office in a state of disgrace almost after having risen to such a prominent place of power, taking the Republicans from the minority to the majority. He found himself on the outs, even within his own party. He's managed to sort of stay on the sidelines and rebuild his conservative credentials by writing books and speaking out on certain issues. It'll be interesting to see whether or not there is an appetite for Newt Gingrich. I think there are still Republicans who doubt that his approach is sometimes the right one, which is sort of a scorched earth policy in some respects. He sort of pioneered that as a backbencher in Congress, brought that into fights with President Clinton, and what didn't always come out on the right side of things there. But it certainly, again, reflects this desire among Republicans to get somebody into the race who speaks to their core values and their core beliefs and their core positions on issues in a believable way. Not that the others don't, it's just there's not one out there that does it all at one time.
Caller also touched on Condoleezza Rice. Are there any other names out there that aren't out there now that you might think?
I wouldn't be surprised if we hear a lot of other names being floated out there. I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about Jeb Bush eventually, although I think that's a very long shot. Still, a lot of Republicans really like the former governor of Florida. Republicans used to have a very deep bench. It's not as deep as it once was. People like Tommy Thompson controlled the majority of state houses. Now Democrats have a majority of state houses. That's traditionally where you're going to find a lot of presidential candidates from either party. The Condoleezza Rice scenario is something that people had talked about a lot. I think you don't hear it as much anymore because she is so closely tied with policies that are unpopular in Iraq, especially, that I'm not sure that there's a lot of appetite out there for her at the moment among Republicans.
Indianapolis for Vaughn Ververs. Good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. I consider myself a Blue Dog Democrat, and a lot of years I do vote a split ticket. I'm looking at the Republicans this year, and I am so disappointed. Number one, there are so many of them. You're confused about who to vote for. They've changed their positions on issues so many times. John McCain, to me, he's a turncoat, from how he ran the last time to how he's running now. And I'm used to the Republican Party of 20 years ago. Those are true Republicans. A lady called in about 5 phone calls ago, the religious right. And when I hear things like that, I see no difference between her and the radical Mideast. And the Republicans feed on this. And I am very proud that the Democrats are throwing some fresh meat at Bush. He's been surrounded by gophers for 6 years. He's never had to face hard issues to where he had to fight for what he believed in. I'm very proud of the Speaker of the House for doing what the Republicans can and will not do. This war is unwinnable. We will have to negotiate our way out of it, and we're going to have to earn back the respect of the world, because this time around, the Republican Party, we have lost that.
Mr. Berbers.
Well, that's again, this is this is a concern for Republicans, losing people in the middle of the political spectrum who might have otherwise been inclined to vote for them. Blue Dog Democrats, independents, we see increasingly drifting towards the Democratic Party. I think that there was an attempt and sort of the Republican tact of saying that the Democratic leadership is too liberal hasn't exactly worked to avoid that sort of sift away from their party because the Iraq War is just so unpopular, and the president is increasingly unpopular, and that has hurt Republicans among people like her.
USA Today headline: New Jersey moves primary to February 5th. Now, here's a short piece. Governor Corzine signed into law a bill moving the state's presidential primary to February 5th from June. New Jersey is the 8th state to move its primary to the first Tuesday in February. You talked about things starting so early. Well, those primaries are starting early.
Yes,
right?
they are. I mean, we are increasingly looking like we're going to have a national primary in 2008, and a very early one at that. I mean, we're in 2004. I think a lot of people were surprised that the calendar had been compressed to the point that it was, where you had all these big contests, one right after the other. Well, now they're just doing away with the compression, and they're just going to have it all at one day. It's confusing a lot of people, strategists within campaigns and people who are covering campaigns, as to what this means. We almost certainly know that New Hampshire, at least, and probably Iowa, will be able to maintain their first in the nation status, even if that means they're going to have to move their contests up to 2007 in December at some point. They have sort of the ability and flexibility to do that. What it's going to mean for the campaigns, there could be as many as 24 states that vote on that February 5th date. There could be Florida, which votes even earlier than that, which would make Florida a more important state, obviously, with a huge delegate cache. This is a point where the money really does become important in this race, and that is people who can raise money like Rudy Giuliani and Hillary Clinton and John McCain, and these top tiers who can sort of stay competitive, can have organizations in California and New York and Florida. Now the question is, does that preclude them doing well in Iowa and New Hampshire? In other words, if they were to stumble in New Hampshire and Iowa, and you have a sort of a charismatic Fred Thompson figure who didn't have as much money but was able to sort of surprise everybody and win those 2 primaries, then roll on into that big date, who gets the advantage out of that? Is it the people who spent money there early and built an organization, or is it the person who's coming in with momentum? That's what everybody's wrestling with when it comes to this primary calendar. But we're almost certain to have a nominee, I think, with probably on that February 5th date or not soon afterwards.
Winston-Salem, North Carolina. You're on with Von Berbers. Good morning.
Good morning. I appreciate you taking my call.
Sure.
I'm a Republican and I'm a conservative and I'm an Afro-American. And I have been very dismayed as to what has happened to my party over the last 6 years. Now, I don't know who's going to emerge as a front runner or who will run for the Republican nomination and actually get it. But I think there's 4 or 5 major issues that whoever runs, they need to address in the campaign. And I don't think anybody is speaking to these issues, at least not in a way that can make us collectively as Americans address what's really important to us. In terms of Iraq, I think we do need to get out of Iraq. We're not militarily, I don't believe we can win the war in Iraq. When we first started out after 9/11, I heard our president say, that, you know, if you're not with us, you're against us, and we're going to root out terrorism wherever it's found or anywhere on the globe. We should have sent 150,000 people to Afghanistan and really gotten bin Laden and wiped out Al-Qaeda. And at the same time, maybe destroy the heroin industry there, which 50% or more of the heroin in this country comes from that region of the world. That would have solved a couple of major problems that are facing us domestically as well as foreign the war on terror. We need to control our borders and get in control of the immigration problem by cracking down on employers that hire illegals and address those illegals that, especially here in this country, doing crime. Because I'm tired of hearing about police officers and citizens getting shot, getting killed, filling up our jails, doing all of this kind of stuff. They get deported, and they end up being back, you know, in the United States 3 weeks after we kick them out.
Thank you, Vaughn Berbers. Let me take the immigration point for a second, because as Congress tries to draft a bill that's going to appeal to enough votes, U.S. News has this story. They ask what happened to the immigration president. They say he's taken a sharp turn to the right in recent weeks. Something leaked from over somewhere of negotiations between the White House and Senate Republicans. It included a proposal to charge 12 million illegal aliens $10,000 each to obtain a green card and other items. Link this, if it turns out to become law, to the presidential race.
Well, certainly immigration is, that's going to, whatever happens on the federal level between now and 2008 is going to force these candidates to take a position one way or another on that. And it's a very dangerous issue for Republicans because the grassroots of the party, by and large, and the activists of the party, by and large, are in favor of building a fence between, you know, they were in favor of building the fence between the United States and Mexico. They really want to see a crackdown on the border situation. And they would like to see these 12 million illegals in the country right now put on buses and taken back. Of course, the president says that that's not even feasible. He would like to provide a path to citizenship. That's the point of where he sort of parts with a good deal of his own party. And these presidential candidates are finding themselves in the same situation, especially John McCain, who was the sponsor of some legislation in Congress that would provide a path to citizenship for some illegals here in the country. And that is just unacceptable to a certain segment of the party. How large that segment is, I think we don't know yet. But Tom Tancredo, who makes this his signature issue, the kind of excitement he's been able to raise about $1.3 million, which is not an insignificant amount for a candidate like him. Basically on the back of that, and we'll see what kind of attention he gets to the race, and we'll see how big that segment is within the party.
Headline in the Des Moines Register, 6 candidates to campaign across Iowa over 5 days. It's happening now, perhaps primarily because Congress is out and a lot of those folks are there, but what kind of week is it in Iowa? Give us your description.
Oh, it'll be a fun week to be there, I think. You know, increasingly, you could just walk across either one of those states on any given day and probably run into at least 1 or 2 presidential candidates, whether you know them or not. You know, they're competing for the big mo. They want to get the big bounce in Iowa and New Hampshire. And for Republicans, it's more important in the near term to really become organized in Iowa, because there's a straw poll that's going to be held in August that these campaigns are already working on. They're already gearing up to try to get an edge on this straw poll, because in the past it has served to winnow out the field. Dan Quayle didn't do very good. I think he dropped out shortly after the straw poll in 2000. You saw some other candidates drop out at that point. It sort of serves as almost an early caucus traditionally. So they're already organizing for that. And of course, there are only so many votes to go around in those 2 states and so many candidates competing over them. They better spend a lot of time courting them.
A couple points about Iowa. The Register says that this will be Rudy Giuliani's first trip there as a presidential candidate. And Tommy Thompson, back to the former governor of Wisconsin, said, quote, "I've been in Iowa every single week since the 1st of December. He told Stephanopoulos yesterday on the ABC show, "I've been visiting individuals and groups and talking to people every single week, and I've been into over 30 counties, 1/3 of the counties, over 100 communities, and it's really looking good." Is that bluster, or is there something to it?
Of course, it's a little bit of bluster, but there's a little bit to it, too. Of course, he's a longtime governor from a neighboring state, a fairly familiar name among Republicans there, as is Sam Brownback from Kansas, who's also spent a lot of time. But what that really tells you is that tells you the difference of strategies that these campaigns are running. Rudy Giuliani, there has been talk that he might look at skipping Iowa as John McCain did in 2000, maybe focusing his efforts in New Hampshire and those big states beyond where his money could potentially really come into play. You know, again, that's sort of the dangerous strategy. If he were to be upset in one of those states and actually competed there, there's a question of where he could sustain any momentum. But these other candidates, like a Tommy Thompson, have no choice other than to try to use these early states as a springboard to the next level.
San Antonio, Texas, you're on with Vaughn Bervers. Good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. You know, there's only one issue that Americans should consider when they are going into the polls, and that's whether, and it's the only thing that's mentioned in the oath that a presidential candidate takes, and that's to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. I hear nothing from any of those candidates that have been talked about this morning. We talk about many issues and what the people want, but that's not the job of a president. It's to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And the only candidate that I know that is following that principle is Ron Paul out of Texas. He announced for his candidacy about 3 weeks ago, and it's been trying to pull teeth to get him on these programs because nobody wants to talk to him. He doesn't want to talk about the sexy issues. He wants to talk about what the job of president is. And I'd like to hear a comment from the CBS man about that. Thanks.
Another vote for Paul.
Another vote for Paul. Well, of course, the great thing about our Constitution is we've been sort of fighting over it for 200 plus years now. There's a lot of different people who interpret things different ways in the Constitution. Ron Paul is somebody who, again, speaks to that part of the Republican Party that has the libertarian strain, the, you know, get out of our pockets and out of our lives strain to the party. And then, frankly, there are a lot of people who that speaks to who are disillusioned at the way that Republicans have grown the size of government, have become more controlling in some senses. You hear a lot of grumbling among Republicans on those issues. Why did we elect them if they're just going to continue to grow the size of government? And you know, a guy like Ron Paul sort of speaks to that. Whether he can get elected is doubtful, but he does. There's a vent.
Current edition of Newsweek. Picture of Fred Thompson here, the former fictional DA, polling third among real Republicans. They put in the cut line. What's a real Republican, by the way?
Somebody who calls themselves a Republican. Conservatives, you know, people in the primaries who are likely to go and vote in the primaries. Mm-hmm. There was some confusion last week as a poll in Iowa, whether or not maybe people were confusing the two Thompsons, the Tommy Thompson and Fred Thompson. But you know, Fred Thompson is somebody that people are familiar with to some degree. He doesn't have the name recognition that John McCain does. But again, these Republicans are looking for somebody to step out and take the lead on some of these issues and become the Republican candidate. We just haven't seen that yet.
Gaithersburg, Maryland. You're on the air now. Hi.
Hi, hello, Mr. Ververs. How you doing? Thank you for taking my call. Hey, do you think the continuous decline in viewership of the major networks, news divisions, programs is a direct result of Rush Limbaugh successfully spawning an entire conservative talk radio show industry that regularly points out that the news divisions, and not just the news divisions, but also the network entertainment divisions, are constantly trying to undermine the political process? Do you think that they're responsible for the fact that you guys are losing viewership and at the same time laying off a lot of employees in your news divisions while at the same time the talk radio is really flourishing?
Well, I'm not sure that the ideology, frankly, has a lot to do with that, or what Rush Limbaugh in particular has done. But what Rush Limbaugh does represent is the changing media landscape that we see just exploding over the past 5 years. Of course, Limbaugh Talk Radio was a big forerunner of that. Basically, people can now get their information, the kind of information that they want from the sources that they personally trust, whether it's on the conservative side or the liberal side, at a time of their choosing. They no longer have to sit down and come home and eat dinner at 5 o'clock, which very few people do anymore, families in this country, and sit down and watch the three major newscasts. Now, that said, those three broadcasts on ABC, CBS, and NBC still get a tremendous amount of viewers, but they are losing audience. I think that everybody recognizes that the landscape has shifted dramatically and irreversibly. What that means for the future of television in general, or the news in particular, is something everyone's trying to grapple with. Certainly online is a component of that. We're just seeing more people being able to get the information that they want from the sources they want at the given time that they want than we ever really imagined was possible. And I think everybody's adapting to that environment right now. And Rush Limbaugh was a big part of forwarding that and being one of the forerunners of that kind of new technology and new ways to receive information.
I wanted to ask what that trend that you cite means to CBSNews.com and your own work over there.
Well, it certainly means that we're trying to capture eyeballs just like everybody else is. We're trying to experiment with just about everything that's out there, whether it's mobile news, getting people information the way that they want to receive it is the name of the game today. And you know, we're beefing up a lot of our coverage at CBSNews.com. Of course, the broadcast helps tremendously in that area, and I think that all the news divisions and cable as well believe that, you know, the internet is a key part of their growth strategy for the future, and being able to maintain people coming to their product and getting news from them is what we're trying to do there.
How about fundraising on the internet for 2008? Because I think we read of Hillary Clinton's $26 million in new dollars this quarter. I think 4 to 5 came via the internet.
4.2 million, 6 million total from their grassroots effort, according to the campaign. 4.2 of which was raised online. Probably, you know, once we get the reports, and you'll have to remember, people who are watching and reading about these numbers, don't forget that these are sort of preliminary numbers. We don't know. All we can tell you is that Hillary Clinton raised that 26 million. We can't tell you how much was for the primary or for the general election, or how much she has spent, which could be a considerable amount, or where necessarily all of it came from, because the campaigns aren't required to have that all filed until the 15th of this month. So these are all preliminary right now. But probably when all is said and done and we go through these reports, that will be one of the key things that people look at. Who raised the bulk of money on the internet? John Edwards has had a very aggressive campaign in that regard, as has Barack Obama, as has Hillary Clinton. I'm not sure that 4.2 million out of a $26 million haul is really an impressive number. It certainly isn't as impressive as the 3 million that she raised one night in Hollywood at a fundraiser. So we'll see. As we get along this, we'll find out who's sort of catching fire online. I suspect that Barack Obama may have done better than Senator Clinton in that regard.
How about on the GOP side? Do you have a sense of who's best at the internet in terms of raising money?
Well, again, we'll have to see when it comes out. Everybody is engaged in, just like everyone in the media is engaged in, trying to figure this out. Everyone in politics is certainly engaged in trying to figure it out as well, both when it comes to reaching new supporters through MySpace and YouTube and those sorts of things, and fundraising. But everybody's trying to be as aggressive as possible. We'll have to find out. I think that Mitt Romney's campaign has certainly put a lot of focus on the internet in general. John McCain has tried to raise a lot of money as well. Rudy Giuliani's a little bit of a latecomer, so I wouldn't expect to the internet. His big website just came up a week or so ago, so I wouldn't expect him to have raised a lot via the internet. But again, we'll see when we get through all these reports who has done well in that regard.
Back to the phones for Vaughn Ververs of CBSNews.com. Baltimore, thanks for waiting. Hi there.
Yes, how you doing there, C-SPAN?
Fine.
Hey, just two quick comments. One, a few years back, Colin Powell was the darling that everybody thought was the up-and-coming rising sun in the Republican Party. But I guess he, like Condoleezza Rice, has been tarnished by the Bush legacy, whatever that may be. My last comment would be, I was on the phone for about 30 minutes or so, and knowing how much of a advocate, viewer, and listener of C-SPAN I am, I always like to get on, but sometimes the conversation goes on so long, and individuals it's so hard to get on to C-SPAN, and then once you get on, maybe we might cut down on some of the answers if possible. You guys have a good day.
All right.
Try to be a little less wordy here. But your point about Colin Powell, certainly, he sort of took himself out of, I think, the race, out of elective politics when he decided not to run in 1996 and 2000, and said that he was not interested in that. But again, you're right, he has also sort of been a affiliated with this war in Iraq to a degree that might hurt his image in the long run, just like Condoleezza Rice, and I think that's why we don't hear a lot about her again.
Fairview, Michigan. Next call.
Yes. Good morning.
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 I'm about Condoleezza Rice. The reason that you're not hearing about Condoleezza is because Condoleezza affirmatively said no to being to that question 3, 4, 5 times. She wants to be president of the NFL. We finally just said, well, I guess she means it. That's why you're not hearing about her. If she even mentioned that she would run, you can bet your boots you would hear about her. But President Bush tarnishing her, that's a bunch of gobbledygook. As far as Mr. Bush is concerned, a lot of us conservatives disapprove of how he's fighting that war because we don't feel he's fighting it with enough force. And but if we had a choice of that wimpy Democrat that ran against him, John Kerry, or him, we would vote for Mr. Bush again. I mean, Mr. Kerry is a traitor in the eyes of many of us. So those 2 points I'd like to just set straight. As far as the candidates today, I'd like the Republican Party to look at Mr. McCain as a Franklin Roosevelt Democrat. That's what he reminds me of. He's strong in a lot of the points that FDR was strong in when he was in the political office. A lot of people look at Mr. McCain as not strong enough, but I think that because he's a little man, they've got to put that out of their mind, I think. Mr. McCain is a very good candidate for the Republican Party, and people should look at him as they would have looked at FDR.
Down Ververs.
Well, they're exactly the type of voter that John McCain is trying to appeal to in this race. And it's where the Republican Party, the people who are going to go vote in these primaries and caucuses still are right now, which is supportive of the war, if not excited about how it's being conducted, still supportive of the war, want to see a strong military, are afraid the Democrats won't take us in the right direction in that regard. First of all, I think that going back to your first point, Condi Rice, I'm not sure she has completely ruled it out, but what we are, but she certainly has not talked about it, and I don't expect her to be talking about it anytime soon. That said, again, like we see with Fred Thompson, Newt Gingrich, and some other people, there are people, activists, who would like to have her. There's a Draft Condi website and a Draft Condi effort. So there are people talking about her, whether she's talking about it or not, but we don't hear the same level of excitement about that as we have in the past.
There is a Washington Times piece today by Ralph Z. Hallow. Giuliani holds lead among GOP hopefuls. McCain gathers campaign talent. They say that Giuliani is maintaining a lead, but his campaign team appears disorganized and lacks visible ground troops in key states, say campaign professionals. By contrast, McCain remains the early leader in getting the best campaign talent available nationally and in several important states. What's your perspective?
Well, I think McCain obviously has the benefit of having run before, is going to be able to gather that kind of talent. Mitt Romney also was very early on organizing in states. Rudy's gotten a little bit of a late start compared to those two in organizing and fundraising and everything else. So you would expect him to lag a little bit in that regard. It'll be interesting to see, well, again, when we get these fundraising reports out, what some of these campaigns are spending in terms of staff. They've all, on both sides of both parties here, they've all been out hiring lots of people, organizing, lots of consultants, lots of talent. That's going to cost them a lot of money as they go forward. And when you raise $26 million, that's great, but how much of that's going to cost, basically? But again, it's the reflective of how energized and how interested people are in this campaign, that they're out there that early, they're committing to candidates this early, these organizers and people in key states. They're lining up already, and it's something we have never seen before.
And on the GOP side, who's ahead in key endorsements from what you can tell, and does that matter at this point?
It matters somewhat. There are some endorsements that are more key than others. You haven't really seen the flood of endorsements that you have in the Democratic side, where Tom Vilsack has endorsed Hillary Clinton, the former governor and former presidential candidate. There were a couple high-profile, there's a couple of congressmen from Tennessee in the South who had endorsed Mitt Romney, and Mitt Romney is somebody who's been out really trying to court these endorsements because it's building his his image up as a real leader of the party. Some of those people have now decided that they're going to switch to Fred Thompson if he indeed, in fact, runs. That was sort of a little bit of an embarrassment. John McCain has the support of some key senators and some key party leaders, but it's really much less well-defined than it is on the Democratic side right now in that regard.
Seattle, you're on with Von Bervers. Hi.
Hi, hello, Mr. Bervers.
Hello.
Hello, have you read the book A Nation Divided by Curtis Lee Sims?
No, I have not.
Tell us about it.
The reason I brought that question up is because it speaks candidly about a lot of political issues that I'm really emotional about, and most notably being illegal immigration. I hope that Representative Tom Tancredo runs and wins because I believe illegal immigration is having a devastating impact on the country and just on the minority community in particular. And there are people such as Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and many of the people of the congressional committee.
More about what Tancredo will bring to this debate once he announces today.
More about immigration. That's what you're going to hear from him. He has made immigration into his own personal crusade and has for years, the last several years at least. And again, you hear from Republicans like we just heard from, or conservative-minded people who are fed up with immigration policy, fed up with seeing illegal immigrants in hospitals and taking the money that they cost. But there are also Republicans, businessmen and business owners who rely on labor from illegal immigrants. Maybe that's not great, but they're less excited about having agricultural workers having to pay those people a lot of money. So we'll see how that, it really does have the potential to divide the Republican Party to a certain extent. And again, we're not sure exactly how it's going to play out, but with Tancredo in the race, you're certainly going to hear about it a little bit.
Bertie, Texas, you are on the air now. Hi.
Howdy. I just wanted to say that I hope Fred Thompson does run. I think he'll do a good job for us. Right now with the people that are in the race, I'm not really sure there's anybody. The only thing I know for sure is I would never vote for a Democrat. But to help the CBS man out, I'll tell you, not that you really need my help, but my belief is that this last election was won by the media for the Democrats. It wasn't anything more than every news story I saw for the 6 weeks leading up to the election was totally negative about the president. It is amazing to me that in this country, for President Bush to be at war, fighting against the foe like the terrorists, that all we do is criticize. We don't have anything positive about our troops. If the sun comes up, they blame President Bush. If it goes down, they blame President Bush. The only way they're going to be able to get viewers again is when they get rid of that left-wing tent that they have. Now, he'll get on and he'll say, no, we're not left-wing. We're just, we're unbiased. But I'm telling you, as just a normal old boy from Texas, I'm just telling you everything I see is nothing but negative and it's anti-American, and it really fires me up. Thank you.
Certainly a comment that the media has heard a lot of, and increasingly hearing it from the other side as well. People who believe that the media has given this president a complete pass on certain things, including the build-up to the war in Iraq. I think when you go back to look at the last election, and you see that there was a lot of bad news for Republicans, wasn't necessarily just the president. There were congressional scandals, the Foley scandal, Mark Foley scandal, the Page scandal involving him. There was financial impropriety. There were just Duke Cunningham. There are a lot of ethical questions surrounding the Congress, which did not help them at all. Of course, Republicans sort of tarred and sort of fair or not, cast in a bad light by the handling the administration of Hurricane Katrina the year before, which seemed to be sort of a tipping point for a lot of these stories. And I think when you look at a story like the Attorney General's, the U.S. Attorney's firings, you see sort of the theme that's developed since Katrina really is the evolution of politics over anything else on part of this administration, whether it's a Scooter Libby trial, which looked like they were bullying a critic of the war. The U.S. attorneys would look like they were bullying them for political reasons. A lot of these stories might not have been such big stories, I think, in a vacuum or in a different context. But since the Hurricane Katrina It seemed to these things have just snowballed one right after the other. I'm not sure that's the media's fault. I think that it speaks to a much bigger concern.
A little bit more about Fred Thompson. Here is a photo in the Washington Times from the Gridiron Club dinner. The arrivals here. The cut line says actor and former Senator Fred Thompson looked presidential in his white tie and tails at the Gridiron at the Renaissance Washington Hotel. That's in the Washington Times. And here is an email from a viewer. Mr. Ververs, I also have noted Fred Thompson's name being tossed around more. I personally am from a mill town on the Columbia River, and I'm a blue-collar Democrat favoring John Edwards. My question is Fred Thompson's association with lobbying for the media and especially to the Tennessee Savings and Loan Trust in the 80s a possible weak point to his campaign?
Well, I'm not familiar with him lobbying for Savings and Loan Trust. I don't doubt that he's got some issues in his background that will be very thoroughly investigated once he decides to run, as all of these candidates are. These campaigns, the media right now is playing to some degree a large measure of catch-up when it comes to these candidates, because I don't think that anybody expected us to be at this point this quickly, where you had so many announced candidates, you had so much money being raised. There's already been ads run in this race, radio and television. I think people are we all knew it was going to be important. We all knew it was going to start early. I'm not sure we expected it to be this much this soon. So you're seeing a lot of in-depth investigation of all these campaigns. And my advice to people who are interested in following information about candidates is to look at some of the papers that know them the best. You know, the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times have done excellent work on Senator Obama. The Boston Globe has done a lot of excellent reporting on Mitt Romney. Of course, Hillary Clinton maybe is more of a national figure. Her hometown paper might be the New York Times. But if you're really interested in these candidates and what you can learn about them, I would suggest you go to some of those local sources. These are the people who've known them for a while, the people who know them the best.
This viewer and this emailer from Longview, Washington finishes up by saying, considering the current atmosphere and momentum of the Democrats, Fred Thompson seems to be an easy target for a large Democratic war chest. Caller now from Show Low, Arizona.
Yes,
Morning.
good morning. Yes, good morning. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I've been a Democrat for over 30 years, and I've lived here in Arizona for that amount of time. And I've been a big supporter of John McCain, believe it or not. And when I vote and look at the ticket, he's the only Republican I've voted for. But yesterday, this past weekend, as far as I was concerned, this photo op that he had in Baghdad was more or less, seems to me, as a presidential stomping grounds. I hope this is not going to be the norm for all the rest of the politicians, because if you looked at when he was standing here, you've seen the big sign, John McCain, WWW. It looked like it was more for a political campaign than it was for him to go over there and say how safe it was. Well, it was sorry that 6 Americans died that day, and that he had over 100 men surrounding him with Apache helicopters guarding him. So I don't think walking the streets of Baghdad. I think John McCain has really sold himself down the toilet on this one. I was just very hurt and very disgraced.
This is a picture of Senator McCain in the New York Times speaking at a news conference in Baghdad. He went with other Republican members of Congress. But go ahead, Vaughn Ververs.
No, this is John McCain's entire campaign is in many ways tied directly to the war in Iraq. He, of course, if you remember, he had divided from the president on a great many things, and personally, after the 2000 campaign, which they fought very hard over, but over this issue of Iraq, they have sort of come back together. And I think it's hard to say that McCain can do anything else other than be supportive of the war until the bitter end. And to that extent, he's over there. He had said last week that it's safe to walk around the neighborhoods of Baghdad, according to General Petraeus, who's in charge of the military over there. Obviously, a lot of reporters then came back and said, no, it's not safe at all. We're over here all the time. Well, there are a lot of, we don't know. I can't tell you what it's like over in Baghdad. I can't tell you if it's safe to walk in the streets. All I can tell you is what I hear from reporters who are over there, which is that it's not at all safe to go walk around in neighborhoods of Baghdad. And I think John McCain was sort of trying to prove a point with this. The fact that he apparently was so heavily guarded with helicopters flying around and hundreds of soldiers with wearing a flak jacket. I'm not sure that it made that point very well for him. That might end up backfiring a little bit, but McCain has been so supportive of this war, even while he's been critical of the way it's been executed, that not sure he has a real, it's sort of when he goes, everybody will know that the war is, he's going to be the last one off the ship, basically.
Last call, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yes, good morning, C-SPAN.
Good morning.
Mr. Ververs, I saw a program on C-SPAN on Book TV this weekend. It was about Blackwater and other private military companies that are not, they're private soldiers that are in Iraq. And we don't hear much about that. We don't hear it on CBS or NBC or any of those networks. And in this next election, I think it would behoove us to look at who's going to get that support, because Fred Thompson is one of those here in Tennessee. And if people understood more of that aspect of what I consider a shadow government, because they're not telling us this, and how much this administration is different from any past administration.
Mr. Berbers.
Well, I think that she does touch on a point, which is that we don't always know what's going on in Iraq, and we've had a hard time learning about a lot of the different aspects of our efforts over there. I think on 2 points, the Democratic control now of Congress, you're going to see a lot more oversight, you're going to see a lot more investigation into the way money's being spent and so forth than you did under Republicans who didn't want to frankly talk about those issues. Now that they have control, we're going to learn a lot more. And, you know, it's really a reflection of, again, reporters who I know who've been over there and spoken to, and they just say, we can't go out and report some stories because it's just not safe for us to do so. We've seen journalists injured in this war. I think that increasingly, as we go down the road, we'll get a fuller picture of what's going on, but it may be quite some time before we really learn a lot of the details about this war.
How about a final thought from you on the Republicans in 08 in this accelerated political world we live in? What are you going to be looking for?
It is accelerated. I think, you know, we'll be looking for, if anybody emerges from this pack that fills the Fred Thompson sort of void that everybody's talking about, a conservative socially, somebody who's acceptable to different wings of the party. And, you know, I think we'll also be looking to see how these candidates deal with the administration and President Bush. And the longer that the president stays with his approval ratings low, unpopular among even some Republicans now, when they start to break from the president on certain issues, and especially the war in Iraq, or if they do at all, we'll be looking for that. And of course, we'll be looking for the unexpected, because if there's one thing that we know about politics, especially these days, is that the unexpected is going to happen. Things are going to be much different a year from now than we can think that they would be right now. So, you know, let's not preordain anything and see how things develop.
Vaughn Ververs, Senior Political Editor for CBSNews.com. Thanks a lot for your time and insight this morning.
Thanks for having me.
A little bit more politics now from Roll Call, where Ben Pershing, the Deputy Editor, joins us now from downstairs at C-SPAN on our first floor location. And Ms. Pershing, there is a story. We've been talking a lot about Fred Thompson, and it says here in Roll Call that Thompson may enlist the aids of Bill Frist. Tell us more.
That's an interesting one. One of the things we've been looking at is the fact that because Fred Thompson is sort of taking his time to make his decision, a lot of the top pollsters, staffers, fundraisers, the people you really need to run a presidential campaign, have already been snapped up by the other Republican candidates. And the longer Fred Thompson waits to make a decision, the smaller that pool might be of staff he has to choose from. So what we wrote about is the one place that there are still people who are available are some of the operatives from former Majority Leader Bill Frist, who's obviously from Tennessee, has been encouraging Fred Thompson to run, and his sort of fundraising base, his political staff, would form a natural campaign for Fred Thompson if he decides to run.
Roll Call Politics. Mr. Pershing, Rove memo exposes 08 GOP fears. What's happening here with this playbook?
This is about that investigation some of your viewers might be aware of. It's an investigation of the General Services Administration, which sounds a little obscure, but one of the factors in that House Democrats have been looking at have been a presentation that was given to employees of the General Services Administration on the 2008 campaign landscape. And there was a briefing of House races that Karl Rove, that the political shop at the White House thought would be close, both Republican seats that might be in jeopardy, Democratic seats that might be in play. And so what our story did was take that list, which has now obviously been put out during the investigation, and look at it and say, well, this is really where Karl Rove thinks the action is going to be. And that's always an interesting thing for us to look at.
Matthew Murray has a piece in Roll Call today. The headline says, Democrats move in Florida vote fight. This is the 13th district in Florida, still contested, right?
That's correct. You know, we're months past the November election, and this is still going on. Vernon Buchanan, the member who has been seated, who won the election, is here, but Christine Jennings, the Democrat, hasn't really stopped complaining about it. Democrats in Florida haven't stopped complaining about it. And now Democrats in the House want to keep looking at it. They have a task force that plans to study the issue. And I don't think anybody thinks they're actually going to overturn the result, but at the very least, Democrats hope that whatever mistakes might have been made in November won't get repeated.
And there's this headline as we wrap up here, start your engines. Josh Kurtz has a piece that says the presidential calendar means accelerated congressional contests. Give us more.
That's true. You know, a lot of people have focused on the fact that a lot of states are trying to move up their presidential primary dates so that they can get in with Iowa and New Hampshire, kind of get the national attention that those states have been getting. And so what our story looked at is one of the side effects of that is that a lot of congressional primaries will also end up moving up, which could be unusual because you may end up having filing deadlines in a lot of states in 2007, as in candidates have to decide this year whether they even want to run next year because the primary calendar is so accelerated.
Ben Pershing, Deputy Editor of Roll Call on this Monday morning. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
And a reminder, Congress is in its spring recess now. The House is out for 2 weeks, Senate is out for 1 week. We will do some open phones for this next 40-minute period or so. You can talk about any topic you'd like, and the numbers are as follows. Republicans, 202-737-0001. Democrats, 737-0002. And Independents, 202-628-0205. Lots more to go through in the papers, but first there's this AP story out of Tehran, the capital of Iran, and it says that state radio there has reported that all 15 British sailors and Marines held captive by Iran have confessed to illegally entering Iranian waters, but in an apparent softening in the dispute said their statements would not air because of, quote, positive changes from Britain. It says here that in London, an official said Britain has agreed to discuss with Iran how to avoid disputes over contested waters in the Persian Gulf during negotiations to win release of the sailors and Marines seized by Iran on March 23rd. The official spoke on condition of anonymity in line with government policy. Iran has demanded an apology from Britain as a condition for the sailors' release. Britain contends the sailors were in Iraqi waters, as we know, however, and has said it would not apologize. It has also criticized the airing of footage of 4 of the sailors confessing so far, saying the statements appeared coerced and the broadcasting of captured military personnel violated international norms. That's from the AP, Associated Press, within the last half hour or so. First call here for open phones, New Kensington, Pennsylvania. Hi. Pennsylvania, you there?
Shit.
Got you now. Pennsylvania? Well, lost them. We'll look to get some more phones up here. Open phones. You can talk about any topic you'd like over the next 40 minutes or so. There's a wrap up here of the annual Gridiron Club dinner. It's in the Washington Times, and you can see various photos here from the arrivals. Mitt Romney and his wife Ann making their way Saturday night past a gauntlet of photographers gawking tourists at this year's Gridiron Club dinner. Chief Justice John Roberts of the Supreme Court smiling for the crowd. Press corps faces own music, says the headline, and just below that is a photo of Alma Powell and her husband, former Secretary of State Colin Powell. We'll read more from this story in a couple minutes, but let's get to those open phones. St. Michael's, Maryland. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi there.
Hi, I'm a naturalized American citizen. I was born in Scotland, and I'd like to talk about the No Child Left Behind Act.
Sure.
I have worked for 8 years at a school for the blind and multiply handicapped, and the act for them says they should be educated to their abilities. And I think this is very important for the No Child Left Behind Act. Everybody cannot go to college, and in Britain, the children are separated when they're 11 years old. 11 plus exam is taken. By this time, they should have attained basic language and arithmetic skills. According to the test results, the child is placed in academic course for 5 years of high school, or in a 3-year less demanding course from which they graduate into apprenticeships, electricians, plumbers, mill workers, secretaries, etc. And the mentally challenged are in another class. If this were done in the U.S., of course, there would be cries of discrimination, but it works. All students are in classes with their peers and are able to perform well. Our present system results in dropouts because of frustration, which leaves the children with no marketable skills. This also allows the teacher to teach according to the level of the class, which I think is very important, instead of having all children in the same class, no matter what their abilities are.
Appreciate you calling. Philadelphia, you are up now. Hi.
Hi. I think that with all of the hubbub going on with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, we might be ignoring some really viable candidates for presidency, like Bill Richardson from New Mexico. He was a member of the Congress for many years. He was also the representative from the United States to the United Nations for many years, and now he's the governor. And I think that he has a lot of experience. And I lived in New Mexico for 5 years in the 90s, and I really have a lot of respect for the man. And I wish that some people would take note of some other people besides these most populist frontrunners.
Thanks. We've had Governor Richardson on the show or on events several times. We'll look to continue to do that, of course. Here's a reminder of the money figures. Senator Clinton gets $36 million. She has $36 million now reporting in the first quarter of 2007. $26 million came from new fundraising in this first quarter. The other 10 came from her old Senate campaign. But some of the other figures include Barack Obama, estimated at $20 million. He was one Democrat who did not release official figures yesterday, but a lot of experts think it's about 20, so he's trailing Senator Clinton by about $6 million in that newly raised money category. But if you go down the list, John Edwards, $14 million raised in the first quarter this year. Here is Governor Bill Richardson, Democrat of New Mexico, $6 million in the first quarter. And Joe Biden, $3 million. This in the New York Daily News today, lots of other papers. Daytona Beach, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
Fine. What would you like to talk about?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment about the Shiites and the Sunni Muslims overseas in the Middle East. I think they have a beautiful religion, but they need to modernize it to a point where they get away from suicide bombings. I think that's much too kind of a word for suicide bombings. It should be like monster bombings. And if we can do that, I think we can work something out, because I think that's all the world really wants. It just looks like that's the definition of thou shalt not kill in our religion, and I think that's what infuriates a lot of people. But I'd like to see them modernize and be a little bit more civilized, and I think they'd get what they wanted.
Let's go to Charleston, South Carolina. What's on your mind?
I'm astounded right now by that last caller, thou shalt not kill. We've killed over 600,000 Iraqis with our invasion, so I don't know that we're the good Christian nation to be talking about thou shalt not kill. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. There's an article, a stinging article in The Guardian, which I think can be accessed via antiwar.com, that's written by Terry Jones of Monty Python this morning. Have you seen that?
Haven't. Tell us about it.
It's called You Call That Humiliation? And it's, Terry Jones of Monty Python, of course from England and Great Britain. And he compares the treatment of the British captives to those in Abu Ghraib and other prison camps that the United States and Britain have, and comparing the treatment of the British soldiers to those that were in the hands of the Americans and the British, and I think it's a wonderful article, and I would advise anybody to read it. And I think, but if I may get one more comment, I'm really sick of this this investigation of the attorneys being fired, or not the attorneys, but the judges being fired. I guess they were judges by this administration. It's not that. I mean, it's kind of going into a non-story now. But what I'm interested in is an investigation into how 9/11 came about and the cover-ups and how the Bush administration fabricated the evidence. And I think Senator Rockefeller, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be holding some hearings. But I think that's going to really be something that will hopefully capture the American public. Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling. Caller, touching on the U.S. Attorney's story, there is this piece in the Philadelphia Inquirer about the testimony of Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. Photo here. The headline says Gonzales' testimony won't be moved up. Ben Feller of the AP writes that the White House scrambled yesterday to move up Gonzales' planned testimony to Congress April 17th about his involvement in firing 8 prosecutors, only to get a cold shoulder from majority Democrats. The effort reflected the frustration for Republican senators in the White House itself over how long it has taken the embattled Attorney General to explain himself under oath. Congress has just begun a vacation. 1 week for the Senate, 2 for the House. In a sign of Gonzales' diminished standing on the Hill, the Senate GOP leader offered lukewarm support for the nation's top law enforcer, whose inconsistent explanations about the dismissals have become a distraction for the administration. Asked directly if he has confidence in Gonzales, Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, said, "I can honestly say the president does. What I can tell you at the moment is that he enjoys the support of the president, for whom he works," he said. "I think most Republican senators are willing to give the Attorney General a chance to come up before the Judiciary Committee and give his side of the story." It says that Gonzales is set to testify before Senate Judiciary on April 17th. The White House counselor Dan Barton said the committee ought to reschedule the hearing for next week. "Let's move it up and get the facts," said Bartlett. Committee Chairman Leahy said Gonzales had been offered earlier dates but turned them down. "It was Gonzales who chose the 17th, said Leahy, and that date will not change now because, quote, everybody has set their schedule according to that. And of course, we'll have that hearing live on the 17th, if it still happens, on the C-SPAN networks. Montgomery, Alabama, good morning.
Yes. Regarding a while ago when Von Verbers was on, there was a Republican that called in and mentioned something about the media bias and said, "Now I know you're going to deny this and blah blah blah." What was the very first thing out of Von Verbers' mouth? "Well, yeah, we've been hearing a lot of that, but well, the Democrats, blah blah blah." I mean, it's the same old story. You guys always say that you're not biased to the left. Even Brian Lamb, your esteemed leader, and I love Brian Lamb, but when he comes on, every time a Republican comes on and says there's a left-wing bias, he said, "Well, do you have an example like we have it on the tip of our tongue?" We don't have it on the tip of our tongue.
Why wouldn't you have it on the tip of your tongue, though, if it's in your mind?
Well, because it's not something you can just say it's this or it's that or it's this or it's that. It's just a constant barrage. I mean, for instance, like he mentioned, prior to the election, and this was a fact that was brought out by whoever does this stuff, 76% of the stories about Republicans were, about Democrats were positive. 88% about Republicans was negative. And then you had this, just to give you an example, this Juliet Halpern, this was back on January the 5th, the Washington Post national reporter. She didn't even, when somebody mentioned John Conyers, who was a Democrat, in trouble, she didn't even know anything about it. That's because it was never in the news. For instance, let me just say one more thing.
Sure.
Look at your papers, and I want you to show me all the stories about Dianne Feinstein, that where she, I'm a little nervous here.
Sure.
About Dianne Feinstein, where she went right in front of the Senate on that panel investigating Carol Lamb and gave this positive response about her, and yet she had sent a letter putting her down previous to that. And then there's William Jefferson in Louisiana. Where's all the headlines on that stuff?
Thanks. We have covered all those stories. We just ask that you watch every day. You'll get the whole flavor as we go through the papers and the articles each day. I assure you, though, we've talked about those items. New York Times this morning has this story about the Israeli leader. Olmert invites Arab leaders to hold talks. It's in the New York Times, and it says that the Prime Minister of Israel on Sunday invited Arab leaders to join him for talks in a regional peace meeting in Jerusalem. This invitation, made at a news conference in Jerusalem with Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany, was described by a spokesman as a, quote, new initiative. She said it resulted from the atmosphere created by an Arab summit meeting in Saudi Arabia last week. Participants at that meeting reaffirmed an Arab peace initiative from 2002, which calls for Israel to withdraw to its 1967 borders. Quote, I invite for a meeting all the heads of Arab states, including, of course, the King of Saudi Arabia, who I see as a very important leader, to hold talks with us. Quote, I do not intend to dictate to them what they should say, but I am certain they understand that we also will have something to say. That's in the New York Times and other papers today. Anchorage, Alaska. Good morning.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
You're talking about a number of items that, of course, are current and very significant, but a recent event draws our attention back to the pivotal moment of 9/11. I'm a family member of a fireman who died in the South Tower, but I'm not using that as leverage. I'm just telling you this is why I'm still focused on it. And what we're finding from the BBC is this premature announcement that Tower 7 had collapsed when, in fact, it did not collapse for 20-some-odd minutes. Are you aware of the story? Are you aware that the BBC has declared now, in an effort to stop the story, that they have lost all of their 9/11 tapes? And they say if they prematurely announced that World Trade Center 7 at 4:54 in the afternoon, they announced, and we have a timestamp on the video, that it had collapsed, and in fact it doesn't collapse until 5:20. So this draws us back because that's the building that so much looks like it was planned. That's the building Larry Silverstein said he told them to pull it, and we watched the building collapse. That's the building whose debris ends at the sidewalk before it touches the Verizon building 40 feet next to it. It ends at the sidewalk before it touches the U.S. Post Office. There are so many questions, but this BBC tape that can be seen on YouTube and the information that can be had at www.911truth.org raises some questions that need to be answered.
Thank you for calling. I want to tell you about a live event that's coming up in about 10 minutes over on C-SPAN 2. It's a summit on emergency preparedness by the American Public Health Association. Health officials will talk about ways to improve local health emergency preparedness. Speakers include Dr. Julie Gerberding, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, other officials with HHS and the Red Cross, plus state and local public health officials. It's coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern on C-SPAN 2. Seattle, you are up now. Open phones. Hi.
Good morning, Paul.
Morning.
Very, very interesting what the gentleman just brought about from Alaska. You know, I have a question for you personally because a couple months ago when I called in, you were moderating. And you might remember I suggested, forgive me if it's already happened and I missed it, but I try to watch C-SPAN every morning. As you can tell, it's 5:15 or quarter to 6 here on the West Coast.
Right.
And I asked you, would it be possible for a segment or two to require that the callers first mention something about their party or their affiliation that they don't like, some introspect, require them to say, yes, this is what I don't like about my party. Did that happen?
We've had variations on it. I mean, we've pressed callers from time to time. I can't recall if we've asked it exactly that way, but it's a good idea. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. There's two quick comments I'd like to make, one about the media and one about taxes. I think that the media, while it's important for us to get the facts, I've noticed over the last 10 years or so, there's a lot that the media has a lot too much power, that there's trial by media. For instance, as an example, recent example, look at Michael Jackson. The media found, and the facts came out that he did absolutely nothing wrong. The media had him hung for months prior to that he was so guilty. They even talked about how they divvy up, how his personal assets would be divvied up after this was over. The media had him hung. And for instance, in politics, you know, the media is almost the strongest factor as to who we elect. They're the people that show us, you know, who they want in power. The other quick point I want to make about taxes is that you hear conservatives talk about how oppressive overtaxation can be, and I'll give you a prime example. If you're in debt like I am right now, an individual working hard can pay $800 to $1,000 a month in interest and penalties alone just to stop their debt from going up. It's a perpetual nightmare for some of us in this country to have a tax debt from a few years back and not be able to get out of it. So as a result, I have the choice of either continuing to work and hoping that that I continue to work so that my debt doesn't go right back up again if I'm unemployed for 6 months, or I can stop and fade off the map and not work for 3 years and file it in a bankruptcy. So there's an example of what happens when an individual is overtaxed to that extent.
Thank you for calling. From the opinion page of the New York Post, Democrats' next debacle, writes Dick Morris and Eileen McGann. They write the Democrats in Congress are heading into a game of chicken with the White House, akin to the Gingrich-Clinton government shutdown battle of 95 and 6. The roles are reversed this time, so the Republicans are likely to prevail. The consequences will be lasting. House Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Reid will find their party shattered. Presidential candidates Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama will be forced to choose sides in their party's schism. The game will unfold predictably. The House and Senate will compromise on the differences in their legislation funding the Iraq War. The end product, carrying poison pill language that sets a deadline for troop withdrawal, will go to the White House to face an inevitable presidential veto. The Democrats' override attempt will fail, and a deadlock will ensue. Then the Democrats will threaten to withhold funding for the war unless the White House agrees to some form of deadline. The Bush administration will reply that it will never agree to a schedule for troop withdrawal, and both sides will glare at the other across an abyss. But Bush will inevitably win the game of chicken. Pelosi and Reid have too much sense to be caught denying funding to troops in combat. Bush will make the price of obstinacy too great for the Democrats to bear. They go on writing in the New York Post about the Dems' next debacle. There is this piece in Washington Whispers, U.S. News and World Report. It's about the former head of the CIA, George Tenet. We're just a month away now from what could be the biggest storm yet, it says here, over who knew what before 9/11 and about those weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. As George Tenet finally tells of those troubled days, we hear vaguely that in the book, At the Center of the Storm, My Years at the CIA, out April 30th, Tenet takes responsibility for intelligence shortcomings, but also isn't shy about naming officials in the Bush and Clinton administrations who share in the blame. It's not all bad. The DCI tells of some amazing intel successes, too. It's going to be a 511-page book, allies say. $300,000 in the first printing. Isn't a rant. Tenet spent 1.5 years researching it, reviewed tens of thousands of documents, conducted dozens of interviews with key players to fill the gaps of his story, the first by a true Bush insider involved in making war policy. Then he had to win CIA approval. To speed that, he submitted chunks of the 25-chapter book, getting the green light in mid-March. So, how big will the Tenet storm be? Several foreign publishers are negotiating the rights for it, and his PR rollout includes a rare 2-segment 60 Minutes appearance, magazine deal, Today Show, Meet the Press. Many books, many articles, many talk shows have discussed George, says his lawyer, Robert Barnett. Now, George will have the opportunity to tell his side. Book out at the end of this month. Portsmouth, Ohio, you're up now. Hi.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hi, I'm a first-time caller.
Glad to have you.
I would just like to know why I haven't heard anything on C-SPAN or in the news about this legislation that Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid are wanting to get passed, and it would force Christian organizations, churches, pastors, and all to register with the federal government as lobbyists, and that would just almost eliminate the free speech of organizations like Focus on the Family and the American Center for Law and Justice.
Tell us, where did you hear about it?
From Jay Sekulow live. I listen to his program on the radio, and I am a member of the ACLJ, and I support, their Christian efforts and all that. So that's where I heard it from, and I wonder why I haven't heard anything,
What does it mean to you? Tell us.
Pardon?
What does it mean to you?
It means that they're trying to silence the voices of Christians for speaking out against, moral issues and things like that, that pertains to godly values and those sorts of things. And if they had to And that's how I hear things going on in Washington through these organizations. Otherwise, the ordinary people like me probably wouldn't ever hear that.
Thanks for calling Kingston, New York. What would you like to say today?
Good morning.
Morning.
As a special educator, I was interested in the previous caller who was from England and taught over here in the States. She brought up some interesting points with the way, especially No Child Left Behind, has affected the educational system here in the United States. Many times we look at the scores that our students have, and you'll hear quotes such as, the United States falls such and such place in science and reading and math behind other European or Western countries. And the tracking of students, which she brought up, the separating of students at a certain point in middle school where they go on either an academic track toward college or a technical track toward labor or trade schools, is a very important fact, because here in the United States, all students take the same tests and in each state as mandated by No Child Left Behind. And those scores are compiled and then compared with countries whose students are tracked in the middle school and separated, and only the academic students' scores are compared to ours, which is a heterogeneous grouping of scores. And as a special educator, she is right about the fact that the effect on the students, on lower-level students, being in the same class with higher-level students, it really contributes to the frustration that these students feel and contributes to the dropout rate. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you calling. Coming up in about 15 minutes, we'll talk with Paul Singer. He's a senior staff writer at Roll Call. The topic there will be congressional earmarks. And at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on this network, C-SPAN, 1 hour after our program ends, Cuba's transition after Castro. That's the title of the discussion at the Brookings Institution in partnership with Cuba Study Group. The Cuba Study Group hosting a forum here to release the results of a new poll of Cuban Americans on the future of Cuba. That's from Brookings, 11 a.m. Eastern Time on C-SPAN, Spirit Lake, Iowa. Go ahead, Iowa.
Yes, good morning.